She smiled at you every single morning, right there, through your television screen. Warm, bright, completely put together, coffee in hand. The kind of energy that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. Savannah Guthrie, the face of today, one of the most recognized morning anchors in American television history. The woman millions of people trust to deliver the news with grace, intelligence, and that unmistakable warmth that no one else can quite replicate. But here's what you didn't see. Behind that desk, behind those perfect lights, and that polished set, and that signature smile, something was happening that Savannah was desperately trying to keep together. Something painful, something scary, something that no amount of professionalism or preparation could fully hide from the people who were paying close enough attention. The truth is, Savannah Guthrie has been carrying something heavy for a long time. And when the full picture finally started coming to light, when she stopped holding it all perfectly in place and let people see what was actually going on, the reaction was unlike anything her fans had ever experienced. People wept. People reached out. People said they had no idea. And that's the thing about strength, isn't it? The strongest people are almost always the ones quietly falling apart where no one can see them. Savannah Guthrie let the world see her. And what she showed them changed everything. Stay with me, because this story is only just beginning. Most people think they know Savannah Guthrie, and honestly, they know the version she shows up as every weekday morning. Confident, quick, funny when the moment calls for it, serious when it matters. The kind of broadcaster who makes it look effortless, who can interview a world leader at 7 a.m., and then laugh with a pop star at 7:45 and somehow make both feel completely real. But the Savannah Guthrie that television built its morning ratings on, she didn't arrive fully formed. She was built slowly, painstakingly, out of sacrifice and struggle and a relentless drive that most people wouldn't recognize if it sat right next to them. Savannah grew up in Tucson, Arizona, the daughter of a judge. She was sharp from the very beginning. The kind of kid who paid attention, who asked the right questions, who couldn't turn her brain off even when she wanted to. She went to law school, passed the bar in 3 states, was a practicing attorney before television ever entered the picture, and then something shifted. She found journalism, or maybe journalism found her. Either way, the pull was undeniable. She moved toward it the way people move toward the thing they were always meant to do, not carelessly, but with a certainty that scared her a little. She worked her way up. Local stations, network correspondent, White House correspondent for NBC News, and eventually, the seat that millions of people would come to associate with her completely. Co-anchor of Today, she had made it. By every external measure, Savannah Guthrie had the life people spend decades chasing. The career, the platform, the respect of her peers and the love of her audience. A family she adored, her husband Mike Feldman, and 2 young children, who she spoke about with a tenderness that was impossible to fake. But here's the part that the morning show format doesn't leave room for. The part that happens between the segments, between the green room and the anchor desk. In the quiet moments after the cameras cut away, and the lights go down, and it's just you, and the reality of your own life. Something was building for Savannah Guthrie. Something that couldn't be scripted or scheduled or professionally managed. And when it finally broke through the surface, nothing would be quite the same again. Here's something most people didn't notice right away. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking closely. A slight change in how she held herself on camera. A moment here and there where something behind her eyes looked different. Not sad exactly, more like distant, like part of her was somewhere else entirely. It was 2016, and Savannah Guthrie was at the height of her career. Today was performing. Her profile had never been bigger. She had just become a mother for the 2nd time. By any measure, life was full. And then came the news that stopped her cold. She was losing her vision. Not gradually, in the quiet way that aging sometimes takes. Things dramatically, suddenly, in a way that blindsided her completely, which is a word that takes on an entirely different weight when you're talking about someone who was literally going blind. She had suffered a retinal tear in one eye. Then, not long after, an accident involving her young son Vale, a toy to the eye, caused serious damage to her other eye, the eye she had been depending on entirely. Let that sink in for a moment. The woman who made her living looking into a camera, whose face and presence and visual connection with her audience was the foundation of everything she had built, was facing the very real possibility of losing her sight completely. She didn't disappear from the anchor desk. She showed up anyway, because that's what Savannah Guthrie does. She shows up, even when showing up costs more than anyone watching could possibly understand. But behind the scenes, the fear was real. The uncertainty was real. The late nights and the medical appointments, and the not knowing, all of it was happening in the margins of the life that looked, from the outside, completely intact. And the most heartbreaking part, she kept smiling. She kept the energy up. She kept being the anchor her audience needed her to be. Because the show doesn't stop. It never stops, even when you're falling apart inside. But the vision wasn't the only thing Savannah was fighting for. There was something else underneath all of it. Something she had been quietly managing for much longer than anyone realized. Before the eye injuries, before the diagnoses and the surgeries and the fear, there was something else Savannah Guthrie was dealing with. Something she almost never talked about publicly. The pressure, not the regular pressure of a high-profile job, though that was real enough, but the specific, relentless pressure of being a woman in morning television, of having your appearance scrutinized alongside your intelligence, of existing in a format where warmth is required, where likability is currency, where the margin for being perceived as too much or not enough is razor thin. Savannah has spoken carefully, and rarely, about what that environment actually feels like from the inside, about the quiet but constant awareness that how she looked, how she sounded, how she laughed, how she carried herself on any given morning was being evaluated in real time by millions of people who felt completely comfortable commenting on every single element of it. Social media made it worse. If you've ever wondered what it does to a person to scroll through thousands of opinions about your face and your voice, and your weight and your choice of clothing, before you've even had your second cup of coffee, Savannah Guthrie doesn't have to wonder. She lived it every day, and she absorbed it. Because what else do you do when walking away isn't an option you're willing to consider? There was also the question of timing. Savannah had her first child at 42, her second at 44. In a culture that has very loud opinions about women and age and fertility and ambition, she navigated all of it publicly. Every milestone examined, every choice discussed by people who weren't in the room. She handled it with a dignity that honestly deserved its own award. But dignity is exhausting when it's performed under pressure day after day after day. And there were cracks, quiet ones, the kind that don't show up on camera, but that the people closest to you can see. Her closest colleagues saw them, and some of what they noticed. It would eventually make headlines in a way nobody predicted. You don't work at a place for over a decade without becoming part of its story. And the story of today, the longest-running morning program in American television history, is not a simple one. It's layered, complicated, full of the kind of behind-the-scenes tension that high-pressure, high-stakes television environments almost always generate. Savannah Guthrie sat at the center of some of the biggest upheavals in the show's recent history. In 2017, Matt Lauer, her longtime co-anchor, the man she shared that desk with for years, the person she laughed with and worked alongside and by all appearances trusted, was fired. Abruptly, shockingly, following allegations of serious misconduct. Savannah was the one who had to tell America, live, on air, with no script for how to do it, no preparation for the emotional minefield of announcing that someone you worked with closely, someone millions of people associated with mornings and comfort and routine, was gone under devastating circumstances. She did it. She sat there, visibly shaken, and she told the truth. She said she was heartbroken. She said she was grappling. And she said she stood with the women who had come forward. In a moment when there were no right words, she found some. But what did that cost her? To sit there on live television and carry that moment? To be the person the network leaned on to deliver a story that was also, in many ways, deeply personal? Not many people stopped to ask. The show moved forward, as it always does. But Savannah carried something out of that day that didn't just disappear. when the cameras cut to commercial, a kind of weight that settled in, a new layer on top of everything else she was already managing. And then, just when things were stabilizing, the world shut down, and morning television would never quite be the same again. March 2020. The pandemic arrived and rewrote everything. Every routine, every certainty, every plan anyone had made for what their life was supposed to look like. For morning television, the disruption was immediate and total. The Today set, that familiar, carefully constructed world of studio lights and live audiences and coordinated segments, went quiet almost overnight. Anchors pivoted to home setups, to kitchen tables and makeshift backdrops, and the kind of improvised professionalism that the viewing public had never seen before from people who were usually so polished. Savannah Guthrie did what everyone else did. She adapted. But here's what was different for her. She was doing all of it, the pivoting, the adapting, the showing up every morning with energy and clarity in the middle of a global crisis, while also being the primary parent in her home, while managing two young children who were suddenly home full-time, while her husband navigated his own professional disruptions, while the situation that had never fully resolved continued to sit quietly. In the background of her health concerns, she was holding everything at once, and the camera, even through a home setup, even without the full production apparatus of a major network, caught something in her that felt different from before. There was a realness to it, a rawness that pandemic television accidentally uncovered in almost everyone. But for Savannah specifically, there were moments, small ones, blink and you miss them moments, where the exhaustion was visible, where the strain of being everything for everyone, professionally and personally, was right there on the surface. The audience responded to it because it was human, because it reflected back to them their own exhaustion. But nobody was asking, at what cost? What happens to a woman who never stops performing strength, even when the world gives her every reason to finally put it down? The answer to that question would come, slowly, and then all at once. It's one thing to carry something privately. It's another thing entirely when the weight becomes visible, when people start noticing, when the story you've been carefully managing starts to tell itself. For Savannah Guthrie, that shift happened gradually, and then with stunning speed. She began speaking more openly, not in a calculated, PR-managed way, but in the way that happens when someone has simply been quiet for too long, and the words finally need somewhere to go. She talked about her faith, deeply and personally, in a way that surprised people who only knew her as a news anchor. She described her relationship with God not as a background detail of her life, but as the actual foundation of it, the thing she returned to when everything else felt unstable. She talked about fear, about what it felt like to face the possibility of losing her sight, about sitting with an uncertainty that had no clean resolution and learning, slowly, imperfectly, to function inside that uncertainty rather than being paralyzed by it. She talked about motherhood in a way that felt honest rather than curated, about the guilt that working mothers carry constantly and quietly, about the specific ache of being very good at your job and wondering if that comes at a cost, to the people you love most. And people listened, differently than they had before, because this wasn't the Savannah Guthrie of the polished morning format. This was someone real. Someone who had been through something and was willing to say so. But even as she opened up, there was still something she hadn't fully addressed, a chapter of her story that the public didn't have complete access to yet, something involving her future, her health, and a decision that would shock even her most devoted fans. The vision story never really ended. It evolved. After the retinal tear and the injury to her other eye, Savannah underwent treatment and surgery and held on to what she had. But the journey was long and the outcome was never guaranteed. She has described the experience of genuinely not knowing whether she would be able to see her children grow up the way she had always imagined. That's not a headline. That's a mother sitting in a doctor's office confronting something terrifying. She leaned into her faith harder than ever during that time. She leaned into her husband. She leaned into the work, because the work, as it always had, gave her somewhere to put the energy that anxiety was generating, and her sight stabilized. Not perfectly, but enough. The relief was profound, and it quietly transformed her relationship with everything she had taken for granted before. She has said that going through something like that changes your vision in a different sense entirely. The way you see what matters, what doesn't, what you're willing to spend your energy on, and what you're finally ready to let go. And just when it seemed like the hardest chapters were behind her, a new pressure arrived, one that had nothing to do with her health, and everything to do with her future. In 2023, a new chapter opened, and this one had the television industry holding its breath. Savannah Guthrie's contract with NBC was up for renewal. On the surface, this sounds like standard industry business. Happens all the time. But this particular negotiation carried a weight that went far beyond the usual back and forth of television deals, because the questions surrounding it weren't just about money or title. They were about identity, about what Savannah Guthrie wanted the next chapter of her life to actually look like. Reports began circulating that she was weighing her options seriously, that the decision wasn't as straightforward as it might appear from the outside. Her loyal viewers started paying attention in a new way, because the idea of today without Savannah wasn't something most of them had seriously entertained before, and now it was suddenly uncomfortably real. What did she actually want? After everything, after the injuries and the upheavals and the pandemic and the years of showing up, what did Savannah Guthrie want for herself? The answer that emerged surprised people. When she began speaking directly about this period, about the contract, about the uncertainty, about what she was processing, she did it with a clarity that felt earned. She talked about wanting to be present, not just physically present in the way that a schedule allows, but genuinely, intentionally present for the life that was happening outside the studio walls. Her kids were growing up, fast, the way kids do when you're paying attention, and the way they do even faster when you're not. She talked about the tension, one that so many working parents know intimately, between loving your work and loving your life, and the ongoing negotiation between those two things that never fully resolves itself. She wasn't performing struggle. She was describing it plainly, like someone who had done enough work on herself to name things accurately without dressing them up. And that honesty, that specific, unguarded honesty, resonated with people far beyond her usual audience. It spread because it touched something universal. Here's the part that doesn't make the entertainment roundups. The heartbreak in Savannah Guthrie's story isn't dramatic in the way that makes for easy content. It's quieter than that, and that's what makes it more real. It's the heartbreak of being exceptional at something that demands everything, and then sitting with the question of whether everything was the right price. It's the heartbreak of a health scare that forced a confrontation with mortality and fragility that no one at the top of their game ever thinks is coming for them yet. It's the specific sadness of being strong for so long, for your audience, for your colleagues, for your family, that you forget to check in with yourself until something forces you to stop. Savannah Guthrie stopped, and she looked, and what she found was a woman who deserved more gentleness than she had been giving herself. That's not a small realization. That's everything. And yet, knowing all of that, carrying all of that, Savannah Guthrie is still standing. That's the thing about people who build themselves out of genuine grit, rather than just circumstances. They keep standing, even when the ground shifts, even when the story takes turns they didn't write. She has come through the vision scare with a new relationship with gratitude. She has navigated the professional upheavals with a grace that her industry should study more carefully. She has been honest about faith and fear and the impossible balancing act of being a public person with a private heart, and she has done something quietly radical for someone in her position. She has allowed herself to be unfinished, to be in